Modern historians refer to the alleged mass murder of the people of Congo around the year 1900 by the Belgian colonizers as a Black Holocaust. Popularized by a fiction novel called King Leopold's Ghost, made mandatory reading for college students, the myth goes that Europeans killed up to 13 million blacks in the Congo Holocaust in order to steal their wealth. Many an African in my TikTok comments sections seem to believe the story really happened, except it didn't. Not at all. Over a period of 20 years, in an area the size of 1/3 of the USA today, about 10,000 locals died in skirmishes with the Belgian police forces. The population of Congo did decrease by millions during that period, due to venereal disease and due to the abolition of slavery, after which the freed slaves, mostly women from other parts of Africa, fled the country. These women had been destined to be mass raped in order to produce children for the African warlords, to sell them on to the Arab slavers. When they left, Congo's birth rates declined so sharply that the population soon dwindled by millions. Notably, it had been the Europeans who ended the slavery in Congo. East African Semitics and Arabs had introduced slavery centuries before. Congo was their birthing basket, where they produced more slaves to be employed as servants in the Arab world. The Europeans didn't do a Holocaust in Congo. It never happened. If anything, the Europeans put an end to the brutal local practice of human sacrifice, such as when one Congolese warlord ordered hundreds of half-naked women to run through barricades, maiming their limbs, only to have their lives sacrificed to Satan in a thirsty blood cult. Moreover, mind the strange wording of stealing African wealth. Wealth is only created by mixing natural resources with one's labor. But Black Africa around 1900 didn't have any meaningful wealth, except for the slaves they put up for sale. Africa had resources, but the factories were in Europe. Europe had gone through the industrial age. Black Africa had not. European hands were able to turn the worthless bauxite into aluminum used for ships and airplanes, i.e., into wealth. Blacks in Africa had not even gone looking for the alleged resources, for they had no use for cobalt or iron ore. It is no different today. Africa still isn't producing any meaningful quantities of wealth. Chinese, European, and American companies are mining the lithium for car batteries in places such as Nigeria. But the batteries aren't being produced in Africa. Had Africans been violent industrialists instead of brutal headhunters, then Africans would have discovered Europe. Except they didn't. Likewise, our subversive historians refer to the mass murder of the people of the Americas as another Holocaust. Except that too never happened. When European explorers first set foot in Latin America, they found a thriving rural economy. When they returned 100 years later, they found nothing but abandoned ghost towns. Since Europeans hadn't slaughtered the natives, historians prefer blaming our germs. We, those primitive and unclean creatures hailing from the north, must have spread our diseases. This too didn't happen. When Europeans first stumbled upon Latin America, they found the civilization already nearing the end stage of its natural historical course. In fact, that's why Europeans were ultimately able to take over, namely because the local societies had grown too weak to defend themselves any longer. What happened in Latin America was the internal collapse of a civilization. The Incas and Mayas largely died out because of their brutal death cults usurping rivers of blood, paired with a failure to sustain their large-scale agriculture. Now, why would modern Western scholars and some foreign historians during the last 30 years pour so much effort into rewriting European history to make it look as though Europeans were always doing holocausts all around the world, as though Auschwitz were the logical and certain outcome of the European course of history? The answer is that our arch-enemies wished they had colonized the world first, but the Europeans beat them to it. Arabs and Semites had, of course, already colonized North Africa and East Africa many centuries before Europeans ever arrived there. But since North and East Africa also didn't have any meaningful production industry and also had not gone through any industrial revolution, those societies relied on the force of unpaid human labor, or what they called human ebony, i.e., black slaves harvested from the African interior, such as from Congo. The white crusaders chased after these Arab slavers and ransacked the slave markets, for example in Sudan, putting an end to this practice and thereby erasing the main source of income of the Middle Eastern world, which was human slave trade. Had the Semites also colonized West Africa and the Americas, they, not Europeans, would have ruled the world. But it would have been a world fueled by slave labor. Now, I assume you understand why the new slave traders switched to mass immigration instead, using immigrants now as the justification to rob Western taxpayers' coffers, forcing Westerners to pay for housing and services to the migrant classes. Get it? It's our arch-enemy's long-planned and long-awaited revenge for the loss of their slave profits. So this is what all this talk of white supremacy is really about. The invention of whiteness is meant to paint a dark, macabre picture of white men in general, in order to disown them from the wealth they generated themselves, in the factories they built themselves, with the resources they dug up from the soil themselves. The idea of white guilt is meant to help dethrone European men as history's victors, not because our detractors care so much about the equality of their new migrant slaves. They don't. But because our arch-enemies wish to crown themselves king of a new global slave empire. And so they have allied themselves with women and minorities against the champions of civilization by lying about the Native American Holocaust, which was an agricultural collapse, and by lying about the Congo Holocaust, which never even happened at all. European history didn't lead straight to the Holocaust. Communism, however, did logically and straightforwardly lead to the Holocaust of Slavic Christians under the Soviet regime when Genrikh Yagoda murdered almost 20 million in the Gulag extermination camps, alongside another 100 million for the crime of being white. Communism led to the displacement of ethnic Germans from Czechoslovakia, Western Poland, and many other places. The same communists now want to repeat their bloodlusted crimes against all the Europeans in Europe and against their descendants worldwide. We are dealing with a satanic cult that thrives on mass human sacrifice. If we don't stop communists, they will exterminate humanity. Their hunger for gore knows no end. Europeans stand tall and have every right to stand tall. We alone pulled ourselves up from primitiveness. Our enemies today are using minorities merely as leverage to challenge our status quo. The invention of a history of holocausts guiding the West serves to stir up the brutal mobs against our so-called whiteness. It's why they made Swedish people look so evil in that movie Midsummer. However, this attempt to topple our stature by falsifying our history, to us, is nothing but another local revolt that will smack down as soon as we take a short break from advancing the world. Our only mistake has been to allow our enemies to speak their minds, not expecting them to use the free word to lie freely. We have been naive, but we will never make that mistake again.